Well, team, I just want to say I appreciate those of you who are picking up on the fact that we've had a little bit of technical difficulty in the last couple of days. We have not sent producer Mark off into a special quarantine. He was not sent off into some exile where only producer Mark gets sent. We just have had some shifts that have had to be made here with all the enormous changes in not just the day-to-day lives of everybody here in New York City, where we originate the show, but also we needed to make changes with regard to studio space and technology. And while I can get my MacGyver on sometimes, better hair though, obviously, I'm not, although MacGyver in his day, I gotta say, he didn't really have a swoop, but it was kind of a fashionable mullet. That was a great show. I used to watch that show with my babysitter growing up, my nanny. And she loved that show too. She was from Liverpool, and she had the funkiest accent you've ever heard in your life. I can't even begin. She's like, "Oh, I'm from Liverpool." It's the weirdest accent you've ever heard. Even for English accents, you're like, "What? What?" And that reminds me, I'm in season 5 of Peaky Blinders. This is where we start to bring some of the conversation in the HUD into what are we going to be doing this weekend? What are our quarantine activities and thoughts and suggestions? Those of you who see on Pluto TV, if you watch channel 248 on Pluto TV, you'll see this show in video form. I had to move some things around just to make room for all the gear and equipment in my home, including I had to move around some books. And I figured, well, why don't I just move some of my book piles into view so people can actually see some of the things that I've got that I've either read or am about to read, because I always talk about having a book list for all of you. So books, shows, at-home physical activity, all that stuff, I think is certainly in the realm of what we should talk about for this weekend. Look, we are all going to, I know it is repetitive, but we're all going to be okay. We're going to get through this. And just remember, we've been through worse as a country, and we're going to get through this for sure. Try to make the best use of the time that we have to be on this lockdown, this elevated quarantine situation in New York. I mean, I'm trying to not waste any time. I'm quite busy. I do 4 hours of radio a day, as you guys all know. So that takes a lot, but I also now have told you I'm going to do a Siege of Malta podcast, which will take some time. I'm still working on the final edits of the book. Some of you are probably thinking, hold on a second. Are you going to work into your book writing something about pandemics? Because socialism now is less of an issue. Well, yes, I have to do some updates to the book about the crisis that will lead to socialism, because one of my theories is that the government will look at everything that has gone wrong and think that government is the only solution, that the government is in fact the answer. They're not going to say, oh, wow, we messed this up in some way, therefore the people should be more in charge of their fate. That is not going to happen. That is not going to happen. So what may end up happening is the government ends up using this, especially given that even the most staunch libertarians at this moment find themselves saying, yeah, okay, we do need government action here. You can't have free markets with everyone showing up to the market with a possibly debilitating, highly contagious disease. So government action has certainly been a part of this whole process and is going to continue to be. But they're going to try to look. They're the same forces of Bernie Sandersism and the Sandernistas, the people in the Democratic Party on the left who want massive expansion of government. They're going to see this crisis, the anger, the frustration, all of the economic dislocation. They're going to see that as an opportunity to push even further for statism and socialism and greater control by the same elites who messed up, the same elite echelons of our own society that were in charge of the preparation for this pandemic, that did not see it coming, that did not make adequate. And this is an across the board thing for government. I'm not blaming the Trump administration. I think Trump has done a solid job on this one. I can't really assess it because I feel like we're in the first quarter of a 4-quarter game. Can you tell how good a coach has been in the first quarter of a football game? This was also my frustration some weeks ago when I was talking to the Bill Maher panel and Bill himself, and they kept saying, Trump is terrible. He's done a terrible job with this. And I was looking at them like, you don't know what he's done. We're talking about something that no one can assess. So you're just spewing Trump hatred and pretending it's rooted in facts. That's all that they were doing. But there has clearly been a series of government failures. There has clearly been some real problems when it comes to the approach that local governments, state governments, everybody involved in this, and most notably, I think you'd have to say the federal bureaucracy are bureaucratic overseers. The CDC, we want them to do a great job, but they didn't do a great job. And in the initial phase of this with the testing kits, now remember, testing has been overemphasized in the media. It's important. I'm not saying it's not important. And there were failures in the process. I'm not going to pretend that there weren't. That would be bizarre. Of course there were. But testing has been elevated in a sense and treated as though that could have stopped this, or that's not realistic. We probably had this thing in the U.S. circulating for a long time before we even knew that there were, before we even knew that this was spreading around the world. But you've seen shortcomings in the government. That's not going to change. And unfortunately, I think we are going to be at a place here where the government's ineptitude in dealing with this is going to look about as bad as the government's ineptitude in preparing for it. That all said, let's get into some what to do this weekend while you are in various stages of quarantine. TV, book, activity recommendations, all that good stuff. So what are some of the activities that we can all engage in this weekend? I've a few things. One, you've got books, and there are so many books that I'm sure all of us would like to read. There's so many books that we have been thinking about reading over time and never really been able to dig into them. Now's a great weekend. You can't go to the gym. You can't go out to restaurants. You can't go visit your crazy Uncle Bill down the street. You know what I mean? You got to just do what you got to do at home. Be with family. A lot of family time for people, which is interesting. I think I'm kidding about this. Most people, I'm sure, cherish all the family time. But for those who are in a house with like 3 or 4 young kids, I'm sure it's a bit lively in there right now with the kids not in school and staying home all day. That's got to be its own challenge. I have a little furry friend here, as in a French bulldog, that is staying with me. And she is a handful, let me tell you. And that's not even a human being that I'm responsible for, but she's still a little bit of a handful. So books that I have out here, I mentioned, it's funny, I'm actually just looking now. I will just tell you about the books that I'm physically actually surrounded with right now. And all of the ones that I will call out to you these are ones that I've read that I think you will really, really enjoy. There's a whole bunch of different versions of Thucydides, the history of the Peloponnesian War. I mentioned that yesterday. The landmark Thucydides is the one that I have. Highly recommend. If you like military strategy and war and things like that, this is a must. You have to read this book at some point. So it's dense and it's long. It's big, but I think you will like it. The Power Broker. History of Robert Moses by the very revered biographer Robert Caro. The Power Broker is like a 900 some odd pages, a big book. It's very good though. It's about how a bureaucrat like Robert Moses wielded so much power and really created his own kingdom instead of the bureaucracy. I'm looking at more books now. I've got Orwell's Animal Farm out. Now this is for everybody. If you have not read Animal Farm, if you haven't read it, I think that this weekend you should almost consider that your homework. I would read Animal Farm this weekend if I were you. If you haven't read it before, you'll read it in a day, maybe a day and a half. You'll rip right through it. And if you're listening to this and you're high school or college age, I know we got Team Buck Campus You guys are all home, and gals are all home now. You'll really enjoy it. But even if you think of yourself as a grizzled veteran of the intellectual battles with socialism and communism, and you've read lots of Hayek and von Mises and you name it, you don't know about the Austrian school. You could take people to the Austrian school. If you really are into that stuff, it's still worth, if you haven't read Animal Farm in a long time, going back and reading it. It is truly brilliant. And the specificity and the way that Orwell really mirrored much of the rise of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union and the rhetoric and the tricks and the tools and the oppression. And it's incredible. I've also got a book over here on Hannibal. Hannibal, the general from Carthage, who almost managed to stamp out the Roman Empire. Almost managed to just defeat entirely the Roman Empire. And some of the battles, like, there's so many ways of saying this, and some of you are going to say that's not how you say it. I've read books just on the battle, and people will say cannae, canny, and can I. You will hear all three depending on which version of the Latin you go with. People say cannae, cannae, can I. Cannae. But one of the most catastrophic battles in ancient warfare that any force ever faced, and the Romans lost and were an entire army annihilated, tens of thousands of people annihilated with sharp objects and clubs, not annihilated with machine guns. Think about what that would have been like. Fascinating. Hannibal crossing the Alps with the elephants. One of the great military campaigns of all human history, certainly up there with Cortez and the conquest of Mexico, the Aztecs. It's really an incredible story. So I highly recommend you pick up a book if you haven't already. If you want a classic version of it, I would say you could go with Livy. Did the war with Hannibal. Livy, an ancient Roman historian. So he's kind of the Thucydides of the Punic War, which is the wars between Rome and Carthage. Steve Cole, The Bin Ladens. It is a really well-written book. Steve Cole's a very talented author. He's a liberal, but he's a very talented author. I don't think anyone really cares that much about Bin Laden anymore. So that's a book that I read back when Al-Qaeda was the single biggest threat that we faced. Now things obviously feel very different. So I don't know if I could give you that one as a top recommendation for right now. William Manchester, A World Lit Only by Fire. I think that's a fantastic kind of narrative overview history of the medieval period. If you haven't read it, William Manchester is also one of the great biographers. And the two biographies that he wrote that I could highly recommend you, I've read both of them. American Caesar with Douglas MacArthur, which is maybe a bit hagiographic. He makes the case. Douglas MacArthur, you read that biography, you're like, this guy was amazing. Nimitz does not get nearly, I'm just telling you what the takeaway is. Nimitz does not get the same love for his strategic skill as MacArthur gets, that's for sure. But you have that, and also William Manchester, who is the professor emeritus of history at Wesleyan University, which is one of the most liberal places on the planet, I think. But he is certainly not Manchester wasn't a big lib. I believe he passed away some years ago. But he wrote a two-series biography of Churchill. The first one is the best known, The Last Lion. I've read that one. It's excellent. And the second one is Alone. That's really Churchill's period in the political wilderness. And there's a movie that you can watch that goes along with that period of Churchillian history called The Gathering Storm. If you liked that Gary Oldman Churchill movie that came out a few years ago, Darkest Hour, or was it Finest Hour? No, Darkest Hour, not Finest Hour, whatever. If you like that Gary Oldman movie, the Churchill Gathering Storm movie, there's no action. It's almost like a stage play that you're watching. But the guy who plays Churchill in The Gathering Storm is the best Churchill. It's the best Churchillian actor I've ever seen in my life. So it's worth it just for that aspect alone. You're really just watching a guy embody Winston Churchill and walk around and be like, pigs look you in the eye. You know, there's a whole. So I could recommend, and I'm sure you can get that on Amazon Prime, any number of places. I'm trying to see what else we have here. I have a book called The Society of the Muslim Brotherhood, of the Muslim Brothers. If you want to learn the history of the Muslim Brotherhood, you could read that one, but it's dense. It's not a fun read. I cannot tell you that that's one that you're going to be like, oh, Buck, this is great. I'm just telling you what books I happen to have surrounded myself with now because I had to shift stuff around my tiny New York apartment. Let's see here. The Devil's Horseman. A quick read, an interesting read. This specifically focuses on, and I think some of the books that I have, like the Society of the Muslim Brothers, I think if you go on Amazon and try to get it, they want usually like $40 or $50 for it. It's kind of rare. Some of these are out of print because you know how I do. Go over to the Strand bookstore, not the rare book section, but the history book section, and pick up books that are out of print because that's how the Buckster parties on Saturday afternoon when the city's not on lockdown. So speaking of the Buckster parties, now I've literally got a French bulldog that heard someone in the hallway. Tallulah, come back here. She's being naughty. She's being naughty because she thinks she can get away with it because, you know, it's the end of the world as we know it and nobody feels fine. Just kidding. We're all going to be fine. Tallulah, stop that. So we also have, let's see here. Oh, a book on Piers Paul Reed, a book on the Templars. This guy is not really a classic historian, but he does a really excellent job in this book on the Templars. I think he also wrote about that. I think he wrote the book that was turned into the movie Alive about the soccer team that went down over the Andes and ended up eating people so that, you know, eating some of their own dead so they could escape and not die because they were freezing to death and had no provisions up in the Andes Mountains. So I'm telling you that the Templars, that the book that he wrote, Piers Paul Reed, it's very readable, you move through it really quickly. It's excellent overview of the subject matter. So that's a really good one. I'm trying to think of what else would be in the Orwell, All Art is Propaganda. I got a lot of Orwell around me right now, but I don't want to overdo that. Pity the Nation by Robert Fisk. Robert Fisk has kind of gone off into some crazy directions in recent years from what I understand, but his overview history of the conflict in Lebanon and Syria, what we think of as the Lebanese civil war. If you care about that, it's very interesting, but that's not on the I'm just telling you what's around me right now. That's not on the recommended list. Ooh, John Keegan, Intelligence in War, and also Martin Anderson, Reagan's Secret War. Very good books. Highly recommend you check these out. I think you'll really enjoy them. Understanding that intelligence can be such a game changer in warfare. It's just a fascinating topic. And if you like that movie about the Enigma machine, The Imitation Game, if you like that, you'll love these books. I mean, they talk about different things from intelligence and war, obviously, as the title indicates. So highly, highly recommend you check those out. And with that, we shall do some roll call. Roll call, everybody. That's right. Time for the roll call. Facebook.com/Buck Sexton, teambuck@iheartmedia.com. And also, I have a request, team, especially because New York is the epicenter right now of the coronavirus fight in the United States, COVID-19, Wuhan virus, call it whatever you want. Would you all please, especially the podcast listeners out there, check out my WOR podcast too, because it's great to see those numbers go up. I mean, our numbers here for the Buck Sexton Show, the national show, are great and growing. I want them to grow a lot more, but they've been doing really, really well, especially the last 6 months. But if those of you who are podcast listeners, especially now, because I think the focus on New York is something that you would find interesting. I don't want to do too much of that here on this show because I know we're talking to you all across the country and in some cases all over the world. But go to 710WOR.com/Buck and you can check out. That's the only place you can get that podcast. And it just helps me. It makes me look good to the bosses if you guys check out that show, listen to that show. So team, especially if you're in the tri-state area, because then I get credit for you as my listeners for the radio station, even if you're listening digitally. Please, team, do. This weekend's a great time for it. Listen to listen to today's and the last couple of WOR shows, because I really get into what's going on here in New York at a time when the whole country's focused in on it. So if you wouldn't mind, 710WOR.com/Buck, and you can listen to the podcast there. Even if you're listening to the podcast normally, that's a different podcast than this show. All right. Now we get to the comments, insights, pithy quips, all the good stuff from you, team. Let's start with Jeff. Hey, Buck, I download the podcast and listen every day. You and Dan Bongino are the two top places for facts, not fiction. Well, thank you so much. I'm in excellent company with Dan Bongino, who's a friend of mine and a really, really good dude, and I'm very pleased and happy for him for all the success that he's having. I'm out here still running up and down the interstates, keeping things moving. The panic buying appears to be pretty much everywhere I go. I'm from Western PA, and so far everyone is acting like it's business as usual except for the panic buying. I've personally started wearing nitrile gloves when I get out of my truck and only use my own pens. It's getting more and more difficult for us drivers out here to find restaurants that are still open, so I'm keeping a good supply of food and water with me at all times. I'll keep you updated on what I'm seeing. Love the show, and I pass the buck on Facebook to everyone. Keeping my gloves out and my shields high. Well, Jeff, man, thank you so much for helping to keep everything going, which is so important right now. We need people. I mean, the front lines of this battle are people who are doctors, nurses, physician's assistants, EMS, first responder, and you just go on the list, and you got to think that the people that are still showing up for work, grocery store clerks, CVS clerks, I mean this from the bottom of my heart, people that are still getting up, getting into their truck and delivering food are keeping this country from having anarchy in the streets right now. I mean, can you imagine if all of a sudden people, but it's not, we're not going to get there. We're going to take care of it. So please, everyone, Buck is chilling everybody out. It's going to be fine. But can you imagine for a second if we actually got to a place where the stores, you went into your grocery store and the shelves were empty and they were like, we might not get another delivery for 30 days. Then you're going to have big problems. So the people who are getting up into their truck, making sure we get this food delivered, the people who are still showing up when, the power goes out for somebody. I think about how, elevators here in New York, elevator repairmen, we still need you guys because if someone gets stuck in an elevator here, they really don't want to hear, well, we're under quarantine, so we're just going to lower food to you, right? There are people that do essential jobs, and we are thankful for them, and we really do. I mean, I see everyone who's showing up for work right now, and I take a little moment of thanks, and also I feel a little pride. I was like, that's right. This is how America does it. We've got our truckers, we've got our first responders, we got our police, we got our fire, we got people that are doing what is necessary. And also, I want to do a shout out for people at iHeartMedia, the company that I work for, who are right now still doing what they have to make sure that the shows like mine stay on air. We've got engineers, we've got technical staff. There are people who are working their brains out, trying to make sure that we can continue the spread of information and also the entertainment and comfort that comes from having shows like this on the air. So a lot of people are stepping up, and we need to keep that in mind as we go forward here. So thank you so much, Jeff. Andy, Buck, and producer Mark. On the topic of things to keep you busy during quarantine, we've come across the great content on the Hillsdale College YouTube page and online courses. My cousin is a current student there and suggested we check it out. They have many hours of content on the Constitution, Congress, and even literature and philosophy. There's no reason we can't all come out of this with a little less flab in our minds, bodies, and souls. Also, the people demand a penalty box with producer Mark segment, maybe a quick minute of sports commentary to spark more hilarious Buck versus producer Mark sports interactions. Give the people what they want. Andy, I've already told producer Mark, when we come back out of quarantine, we should really take the opportunity to start doing the penalty box. It probably won't be every day, maybe once a week, but we just give the floor to producer Mark for, a few minutes for his favorite sports stories or something else from the week. And then he gets to carry the content, and I get to do the little poke. Yeah, what do you got, producer Mark? Yeah, what do you got? And we'll see how that goes. I cannot out-salt Salty Mark, though. That is for sure. Dennis, From mostly Wuhan virus-free mid-Missouri, trying to help out being part of your social network as the Freedom Hut stays hunkered down. Thanks as always for your great work. Yes, the show is superb, but I would like for you to know that there are probably many like me that really appreciate the research and background work obviously done each and every day as you put together such a well-balanced and informative show. Your work does not go unnoticed. Always interesting to get your perspective as a young man in New York City, being I'm a 61-year-old living in rural mid-Missouri. Interesting in that it seems the conservative mindset doesn't vary with age, economic status, or geographic location. Well, Dennis, first of all, thank you so much for the really very generous words about the show and the research and the effort that we put into it. People always ask me how I prepare for this show, as if I have some, yes, I do like, an hour, and then there's a little bit of structure in my day, but I'm preparing all the time. I find myself, let's say in pre-quarantine life, I would be at the gym and have a thought about a segment or a topic or just an idea, and I got to stop what I'm doing and start taking. I take a lot of notes on my phone. That's how I remember things. So I'll just start furiously, with my thumbs writing on my smartphone so that I can do some segment the next day or maybe even the next week. I send myself articles to read later constantly all the time. I mean, I'm almost now, I feel like my mind has melded with my cell phone to the point where I'm not sure there's really much of a separation between the two because I'm constantly doing research and reading. And so the fact that you appreciate that really does mean a lot because it is exhausting. And I'm trying not to turn into Jabba the Buck, especially during quarantine. So when your mind is that tired and you're so focused in on research like that, you also got to make time to get out and move and go to the gym and be healthy and all this stuff. Although right now I had some gluten-free lasagna last night. Feel a little bit like Garfield the cat right now and starting to look like him. I gotta tone that down or tone things up, as the case may be. I was in a good zone for like a month, folks. I'm telling you, I was getting stronger. The biceps were growing. The waistline was shrinking. Everything was good. And then this happened, and I'm just like, I can't win. I can't win. The last time I feel like I was in a really good zone of working out was maybe 3 years ago. And some of you who have watched me enough can see, I got really lean, like for me, down into the 170s, which is light for the Buckster. I'm 6 feet tall, but I was in the like 175, 178 range, which for me that was lean and mean. And then I got chronic headaches that lasted continuously for weeks at a time, and they were recurrent. And so I missed out on and working out would create worse headaches. So I missed out on about 6 months of workouts. And since then, I've been trying to kind of get back to that place. But I'm telling you, I was on the way for this summer, and then this came along, and now I've just got to eat some gluten-free lasagna. It's been a tough day. The world's falling apart. That's kind of how it feels sometimes. Let's see here. And Dennis, yes, about the age range, I have a lot of friends, and I mean friends. I don't mean associates, people that I call. I just reached out to a friend of mine last night who's 74, checking in on him. I emailed another friend, a dear friend. He was a mentor of mine, but is just a dear friend now, who's also in his late 60s. And these are people that I will call and just talk to on the phone for 30 or 40 minutes because they're buddies. They're like my peers. And they're conservative. And so we share that ideological foundation. I've become friends. So I do think that because conservatism is rooted in ideas and rationality and not age, identity, gender, when you are a conservative, you almost belong to a club. It's a club that we want everyone to join. That's the thing. The only price of admission is accepting the basic tenets of conservatism, accepting the belief. But when you meet somebody else, and this is true whether I'm, in your dating life, in your social life, in your professional life, if you're a true conservative and you meet somebody else, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if they're 15 or 95. Doesn't matter male, female, or anything else that's going on in terms of background, ethnicity, you name it. You have this common ground that is a very powerful bond and also, I would say, means of communicating about all kinds of things. Conservatives get my humor better than liberals do, for example. Conservatives laugh at my jokes more than liberals do. And I don't mean about political stuff. They just share a sensibility with me. They have I think conservatives generally have a more dry sense of humor. And anyway, that's how I feel about it. Tyler, I'm a UPS driver in Minnesota. I'm a newer listener, and you have quickly become part of my daily routine. I appreciate what you're doing. You're helping to keep me sane out here all day. Also, say a prayer for my wife who took up potty training our toddler during quarantine. There's pee everywhere. Please help. Tyler, well, you're not the only one, man. I got to deal with this little dog. I mean, it's not a human being, obviously, but a dog in my apartment that I haven't been in charge full time of a dog. I don't know, really ever before, not this long. She this morning, she gave 2 headbutts to the bowl. So the food mix, I call it the little triceratops, where she starts headbutting the bowl of food to show me that she's not happy with what I gave her. Just for the record, I gave her roast chicken that I cooked with mine own hands and that I had been eating for days. This is the kind of food that I give this spoiled little pooch, and I don't always get the most gratitude from her because she's very French. Yes, you give me the roast chicken, but do you give me all the love and attention that I need? No? So Tallulah is difficult. But Tyler, I'm so happy, man, that you are a part of Team Buck, and welcome. And hey, UPS driver, please keep delivering those packages. It's the only way we can get stuff. So you, my friend, are one of those people who is holding the line, keeping your shield high for all the rest of us. So thank you very much for that. And good luck tell the missus good luck with the potty training. All right, roll call continuing here. Let's see what we have here. Ari, Buck, time in the hut is the highlight of my day. But please discourage people from buying baby wipes as an alternative to toilet paper. They are already hard enough to come by right now for those of us with actual babies to wipe. You and Mark rock, shields high, and hands washed. Well, thank you so much. I don't think anybody really, I'm not like supporting the mass movement to switch to baby wipes. There were adult bottom wet wipes that were a trend for a little while, but I think that fell away mostly because of the stories about these fatbergs that grow in the septic system from these wipes. Just, they don't dissipate quickly, and they just build up, and they become like the size of, a few city buses. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. So, yeah, no, I hear you. And I'm glad you like me and producer Mark. And you will, guys, next week we should have producer Mark back in. We should have all of our clip capability back, guests back. But for right now, we just had to make sure this sounds good for Pluto TV. The first looks good. And that as long as the internet and the power are on, this show continues. So that's where we are. And that's what we had to set up. But that meant that for a couple of days here, we were a little bit light on the technological prowess. I'm not like one of these radio hosts that's got like a mansion and a staff. Oh, excuse me, sir, your radio studio is ready. It's not like that. I had to make my own studio. And I can get my MacGyver on, but it's not easy for me. I'm not somebody that comes naturally to. Sandy, love the show. Your calm voice of reason is appreciated. Keep up the great work. Shields high. Well, thank you so much, Sandy. Appreciate it. Let's see what we have here. Hold on a second. Katie, hey, Buck. Every day I have thoughts and comments throughout your show I'd like to share, but producer Mark says keep it short. So here's my number one question today. Why has the government essentially shut down the economy but allowed the stock market to tank? Can't they cease trading while businesses are put on hold? Thanks for keeping us safe and warm through the good and the bad. Hang in there. Katie, the problem with shutting down the market continuously is that then you're shutting down even more commerce. And there is a school of thought that the market needs to reflect what's actually going, there needs to be the sell-off that come now. Right now, the sell-off is artificial in the sense that it's caused by a virus, but we were due for a market correction. And some people would say that it was inevitable in a sense. So that's why I guess, but there are people who are suggesting we should shut the market down for a week or two while everyone's on lockdown. That's an interesting idea. I'd have to talk to somebody who honestly really has a macro sense of that more so than I do. Stacy, hey, Buck, caught a bit of you and Toulouse and thought I'd take a second to congratulate you on your continued success. Can't wait to read the book. I always feel like you're my brother from another mother. Gluten is our enemy. Cruises are no bueno. I've watched Tombstone 100 times, and I too hate noise pollution. Anyway, stay healthy and sane in the Big Apple. Look forward to listening to the podcast each day. Well, thank you so much, man. I really do appreciate that, Stacy. We'll get to Peter here. Buck, first glad to have some normalcy here. Thank you and producer Mark for staying on. I think it's 6 weeks before the curve is at a point where we can say it's almost over. 8 weeks until a return to normalcy. Stay healthy and stay on and shields high. And also, medical supplies and medicine should now be seen as national security matter and produced here and only here. All right, then. Everybody, please rest, recuperate, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones this weekend. Stay as locked down as you can. You can go for a walk. Just obey the guidelines that are out there. Let's not get too crazy about this. Protect our vulnerable population. We'll be back together every day, as we always are, shoulder to shoulder, shields high.